Okay, so let's get going on this axle. 19 millimeter. Carefully remove the wheel. So let's spray our axle nut. A little bit of penetrant. Use a 34 millimeter socket. Remove the axle nut. Now you can use a punch and a hammer or an air chisel. Go right in the center here. Give that a couple bonks. Just try to break the axle free from the wheel bearing. So we're going to find our ABS wire here. That's the small skinny wire. And we're going to unattach it. So all the little mounting points that go to your brake hose, should be 2 of them. One there, one over here. Okay. That frees this up. We're going to follow it up. Come right up here. Take that out of there. If you look at the inside right here, you're going to see a couple little bumps. You just want to pry those out. Let's see if I can get it. There it is. Okay, here's your ABS connector. This red thing right here is a lock. So you're just going to go in between here like this, pop that lock, squeeze this tab, and pull this apart. If it doesn't want to squeeze and pull, just kind of go under it like this. And we should be able to pull it right apart. Grab this, set it aside. Okay, so next we're going to separate the outer tie rod end from the knuckle. To do that, I'm just going to get rid of this safety pin right here, or cotter pin. And grab that. Pull that out of there. Remove the locking nut. Now I'm going to use my hammer, and I'm going to give the knuckle a couple bonks. I'm going to be very careful not to damage my outer tie rod end boot, and I definitely don't want to damage the threads on the tie rod. Awesome. Okay, so grab yourself something that you can hang your caliper from. I like to set it up on the upper control arm for now. I'm going to use my 21. I'm going to remove the bolts that hold the caliper bracket on. Grab that caliper and set it aside. Remove your rotor. Okay, so let's remove this upper ball joint nut. To do that, I'm going to use a 21 millimeter with a swivel and extension, of course, safety glasses. Do yourself a favor. Put it back on, just a couple threads here. Okay, so next we're going to use our bonking device slash hammer. We're going to hit right here on the knuckle and try to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. We've got our nut on here. Be very careful for the boot and of course for the thread slash nut. That's separated. That's as far as we need to go with hitting it. Let's move along. All right, so let's tie this ABS wire up and out of the way here. Here we are. We're going to remove this lower ball joint nut using a 22 millimeter socket. Just going to start it back on there a little bit. Now we're going to break this free. Okay, so looking back up top here, you just want to make sure you have plenty of room between the nut and the knuckle. So that way there, when we bonk down here, this is going to be able to drop down. We have 2 safeties at this point. You have the lower nut, that's going to prevent it from falling down. And if God forbid for some reason this one falls off, you're still safe with the top. Here we go. There we go. So we're just going to lift up on it and start removing these nuts. You're going to have the weight of the knuckle on you now. We're going to bring it down, slide the axle out of there. Okay, so it's time to remove this sway bar link bolt. You're going to use an 18 millimeter socket. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to use our 21 millimeter wrench. Just put it on that nut. 18 millimeter socket on the other side. We'll remove this bolt. Awesome. Okay, so we have our collection bucket so we can make sure that we don't get any chemicals on the ground. We're going to come up here and we're going to pop the axle out of the differential. There we go. That came out fairly easily. And this is just to make sure that no fluid comes down. I'm going to use my long pry bar. I come right under here like this, and I can pull down just like that. Okay, get this under, pull it, bring it down, slide out the axle. Okay, so right in here you have your axle seal. It's pressed right into the differential. If you're not replacing it, which I would recommend doing, but if you're not, just take a rag, wipe it down, and just make sure you have all the crud off of there. That feels good. I'm just checking for any tears or bulges that I can feel. If you felt either of those, you'd want to replace it. So we have our brand new TRQ axle. I'm just going to put it up like this. I'm going to pry down. Just try to get our axle under there, being careful not to tear our boot. Put this up. Okay. I'm going to give the end a couple bonks with my rubber mallet. Just make sure that it's pressed all the way in. You can feel down along the bottom and along the sides. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so let's take our pry bar, get it back underneath here so we can go like this. We're going to take our bolt and we're going to go back through here, okay? So we're going to line it all up. Try to get it so it's looking pretty. Slide that through. Okay, so let's bottom out this nut. Okay, let's torque it down to manufacturer's specifications. Let's tighten this to 110 foot-pounds. Okay, so let's remove this bolt. Okay, and the reason why we remove this is just because it's hard to get the right angle for putting this bolt in if you still have the upper portion attached, all right? Okay, still loose. Now we can finish up with the rest of it, just putting this bolt through. Okay, so let's use a little copper never seize. Just go right on the splines of that axle. Take your knuckle assembly, slide it up on there. Get this back together. Start those on there, a few good threads. Awesome. Lift up on this upper. Slide it through. Upper ball joint nut. Start that on. We're going to snug up this lower ball joint nut. It's bottomed out. We'll finish by torquing it in a second. Tighten up this upper nut. That's bottomed out. So let's just get our outer tie rod in through the hole here. So now we're going to torque this to 30 foot-pounds. Let's torque the lower one to 40 foot-pounds. Let's get this back out of here. Get the ABS wire out of the way. At this point, you want to clean up your hub. If yours is dirty or if it's got rust on it or anything, clean it up nice. Put a little bit of copper never seize. This one looks great, so I'm not worried about it. And of course, the back side of the rotor as well. If that's rusted, make sure you clean that up. Let's get this rotor on there. Just going to grab one of these lug nuts just to make sure that this can't fall off and potentially hurt us. So let's take our caliper bracket bolts and mount our caliper on. Bottom those out. Now we're going to torque these down to 100 foot-pounds. Okay, so let's get our ABS wire back on. Make sure you put it back in all the mounting points. Go right along this flex hose here. Comes up along here. Make sure you clip it in right there. Connect these together. Listen for the click. Push in the lock. Give it a tug. That feels great. Put this up in here. Push those through. Give it a tug. They can't go anywhere. Beautiful. Okay, so let's get this outer tie rod in. Nut on here. Bottom it out. Torque it down to 30 foot-pounds. Okay, now we're just going to take a peek. You want to check for that slot inside the tie rod or the hole in the tie rod and match it up with the slot on the nut. If it doesn't match up, you need to continue tightening until you get to the very first slot that the hole lines up with. A little bit more here. That looks pretty great. Make sure you put in your cotter pin. It's a good idea to use a new one if you have access to it. Peen it over so it can't fall out. There's no way that this nut can come loose. Okay, so we'll take our axle nut, start it on here. We're going to bottom this out, and then we're going to torque it down to manufacturer's specifications. Now to torque it, you're going to notice that this is going to want to spin on you. You can use something as simple as a nice long pry bar, wedge it in there between the lug studs, grab your torque wrench, torque it down to 100 foot-pounds with your 36 millimeter socket. Okay, so let's get our wheel back up on here. Start a lug nut on. Let's bottom these out. Now let's torque them to manufacturer specifications. Okay, so let's torque these lug nuts to 115 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Torqued.